You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. When you practice situational questions, the hardest misses are not because you didn't know the material, but because you fell into a thinking trap. These traps, called cognitive biases, creep in when the clock is ticking and stress is high. They nudge you toward the quick, familiar, or emotional choice instead of the disciplined, policy-driven one. The purpose of this lab is to name these traps, notice them when they appear, and neutralize them with short anti-bias scripts. By giving each bias a simple counter, you take away its power. The PMP exam rewards objective reasoning, not instinctive shortcuts. The method is threefold. First, name the bias clearly so it can't hide. Second, notice its symptoms in the answer set or in your own thought process. Third, neutralize it with a script that is short enough to repeat under exam pressure. These scripts are not long explanations. They are bite-sized reminders you can speak in under 5 seconds. Each one is tied to a PMI-aligned countermove, so using it keeps you inside the framework the exam expects. The act of saying the script, either aloud in practice or silently in your head on exam day, gives you a reset. Let's review the most common exam biases. Anchoring bias is the pull of the first option you read. If it looks good enough, you stop evaluating. Confirmation bias is the urge to pick the option that fits what you already believe, instead of testing it against evidence. Availability bias makes you overvalue the most recent story or memory, like a recent outage. Sunk cost bias, also called escalation of commitment, keeps you locked into a path because of past investment, even when the future risk outweighs it. Loss aversion makes you overly cautious, avoiding small risks while ignoring bigger opportunities. And finally, authority bias and overconfidence, believing the VIP must be right, or trusting your gut under time pressure without checking artifacts. You'll often see these traps echoed in option patterns. Some answers say, do everything, listing multiple actions that skip prioritization. Others jump to escalate first, passing the problem upward before you've facilitated alignment. Some go straight to re-baseline, skipping impact analysis. Others imply skip evidence, telling you to act without logging or documentation. A reliable way to spot traps is to look for verbs. Options that begin with approve, skip, or escalate without an analysis step are red flags. Duplicate actions, phrased differently, are another clue. They tempt you to pick redundancy instead of balance. Here are a few anti-bias scripts to rehearse. For anchoring, say, summarize the stem, list the artifacts, then check each option against the artifacts before choosing. This forces you to slow down and compare systematically. For sunk cost bias, say, past spend is irrelevant. Decide on remaining value and risk. That reminder keeps you from justifying bad projects with sunk investment. For availability bias, say, seek the artifact, not the loudest memory. This stops you from letting a recent incident dominate your judgment. Each of these scripts is under 10 words and easy to recall when stress rises. Think also about your reading strategy under time. A consistent approach prevents bias before it takes root. Start each stem by extracting 4 elements: role, phase, constraint, and verb. Who am I in this case? Project manager, scrum master, or sponsor? What phase are we in: planning, execution, or closeout? What constraints are visible: fixed cost, fixed schedule, compliance requirements? And what action verb is implied: analyze, approve, escalate, communicate? This structure keeps you anchored in context rather than in bias. It also makes traps easier to spot. If the verb skips analysis, you know it's suspect. When you see a stem where impact is not clearly defined, train yourself to pause and say, impact unknown, analyze or consult artifact. This phrase stops you from picking a shortcut and reminds you to look for the evidence path. When you're torn between 2 plausible options, use another fallback. Pick the one that preserves the baseline and stakeholder alignment. This works because PMI questions almost always favor protecting agreed baselines and stakeholder engagement over unilateral moves. These microscripts act like brakes on bias. They keep you from rushing and force you back to the professional discipline the exam is testing. Bias awareness is not only about passing the exam, it also mirrors the real-world habits of project leadership. Stakeholders will pressure you with sunk cost arguments. We've already spent so much, we have to continue. Executives will anchor you with the first option they suggest. Teams will overreact to the last crisis, pulling you into availability bias. In all these moments, your role is to step back, reset, and choose based on evidence and governance. Practicing these anti-bias scripts under timed conditions builds the reflex to do just that. The beauty of Debrief labs is that they give you a controlled space to catch yourself in bias. In practice, when you miss a question, don't just note the right answer. Ask, was this a knowledge gap, or did bias sneak in? If it was bias, which one? Anchoring, sunk cost, availability? Tag it, then rehearse the counterscript aloud. Over time, your brain begins to recognize the patterns earlier. Eventually, you'll hear yourself start to anchor or rationalize sunk cost, and you'll stop mid-thought. That awareness is the victory. It helps to pair bias recognition with a physical reset. When you realize you're rushing, pause and breathe once deeply before rereading the stem. That one breath interrupts the automatic loop and gives your scripts room to surface. In practice sets, deliberately build these resets into your timing. For example, every 30 questions, pause for 10 seconds, breathe, and remind yourself of your anti-bias scripts. This keeps you fresh and reduces errors caused by fatigue. On exam day, those micro pauses are worth more than the few seconds they cost. To make these habits stick, speak the anti-bias scripts out loud in short bursts. For anchoring, summarize, list, compare. For sunk cost, ignore past spend, decide on future value. For availability, artifact first, not memory. For authority bias, policy over VIP. For overconfidence, check the artifact before trusting the gut. These phrases are not elegant, but they are sticky. Their bluntness makes them memorable under pressure. You don't need poetry in the exam, you need guardrails. When you tie each script to a PMI-aligned move, the connection is even stronger. Anchoring is neutralized by impact analysis and artifact checks. Sunk cost bias is neutralized by benefits management and value forecasting. Availability bias is neutralized by consulting risk registers and compliance logs. Authority bias is neutralized by decision rights matrices and change paths. Overconfidence is neutralized by slowing down and consulting baselines. In other words, every bias has an antidote inside the PMI playbook. Recognizing that builds confidence, because you know the answer is already in your toolkit. As you work through this lab, remember the flow. Name the bias, notice it in the stem or options, and neutralize it with a script. Practice tagging your own thinking. That was anchoring. That was loss aversion. The act of labeling brings the bias into the open, where it can't control you unconsciously. Then rehearse the short script to reset. Over time, you won't need to say them aloud. They'll flash in your mind as you read. That flash is what keeps you objective under pressure. By embedding these practices, you create a buffer against one of the biggest exam risks, rushing into traps. The PMP situational questions are designed to tempt you with bias-friendly answers. Your job is not just to know the content, but to navigate those traps calmly. Anti-bias scripts, artifact-first thinking, and micro-pauses give you the tools to do exactly that. These are not just test hacks, they are leadership habits. In projects, as in exams, the calm, evidence-driven manager is the one everyone trusts. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.